Fine. Okay. Hopefully that's working. If not, we can anticipate a text message from Penelope at any moment telling me that it's not. Good rainy afternoon from sunny Florida.
Yeah.
So this week we are in Parashat Vayera, which has a lot of very good famous stuff. And we're going to look at one part in particular. The part that we're going to look at deals with Sodom, or Sodom and Gomorrah if you want the full name, but Sodom's a lot easier to write than Gomorrah, and it does tend to get more of the focus. You're writing a travel brochure for Sodom. What would you list as the features, the attractions, the things you might expect to see when you go to Sodom?
Anything you want.
Okay.
Same as Las Vegas.
Anything goes. Las Vegas.
What happens in Sodom?
All right, so Sodom is known as being a place of open morals, perhaps. So from previous discussions, we've talked a little bit about how Chazal, how the sages viewed. We're not on a page yet. On how the sages viewed Sodom. Do you remember any of the different descriptions of Sodomite behavior according to the sages?
The thing I remember is that everything was 180 degrees out of phase.
Right?
That what was moral to us was immoral to them.
Okay, so for example, note tzedakah. Right, tzedakah was prohibited by law. You were not allowed to give tzedakah. I remember that, right? No hospitality. You were not allowed to give hospitality. Right? Well, hospitality we consider to be a virtue. They considered it to be a sin. And as you said, over and over and throughout other cases of judgment, they would always find for what we would consider to be unjust. That's considered to be the nature of Sodom. And why, by the way, in Pirkei Avot, when they talk about people who say, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, they say that is the characteristic of Sodom. That one may sound as fair and, just you got yours, I got mine, that's it. That may sound fair, but in fact, that is a very stingy proposition and one that limits our ability to help others. And that's the kind of folks Sodom was. The term Sodom or sodomy and sodomite that becomes used in English, not so much associated with Sodom in the text itself, neither in the Torah text nor within the sages. But one thing you might be a little bit surprised to find in Sodom, maybe, would be Mashiach. We're going to find the Messiah in Sodom. All right, that's our goal for today. And we're going to find that the sages themselves are the ones who make that claim, not just Rabbi Neely. We'll get there. But first, we got to go there. First, we have to dip into Sodom and see what's going on. So we are now going to look at chapter 19, page 104. What's that?
Starting with the two angels?
The two angels, exactly. If you're volunteering.
The two angels arrived in Sodom in the evening, as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to greet them, and bowing low with his face to the ground, he said, "Please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night and bathe your feet, that you may be on your way early." But they said, "No, we will spend the night in the square." But he urged them strongly, so they turned his way and entered his house. He prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. All right.
So what do we know about Sodom here? Apparently from Lot, not a place you want to just sleep out in the open. That would have been perfectly fine in many cities, right? It's the town common. You're a traveler. There weren't a lot of inns and hotels and motels and all that kind of thing in the ancient world. So sleeping in the town square would probably be very acceptable. You would have slept in worse when you were out on the trail between towns. So why not? So they say, no, don't bother yourself. We're fine out here. And he says, no. Trust me. You don't want to be here as a stranger. come to my house, turn aside, and I will take care of you. And you can get an early start before anyone knows you're here.
There is an ulterior motive for early start.
There is an ulterior motive for early start, at least according to the standard commentary, exactly. That you stay here and we'll get you out of here before anyone knows you were here.
Is urged strongly a euphemism for something other, like strong arming or?
Well, we have to begin to see a parallel. It's not a euphemism for strong arming, but what does this sound familiar to? Very, very recently in the Torah. I know we didn't read it out loud together, but hopefully you've read this Torah portion before.
Abraham and the angels.
Abraham and the angels which come.
Talked them into coming in for lunch.
Exactly. The three angels that come to Abraham and that are bringing the news that Sarah is going to have a child. He's the one who greets them and says, please turn aside and come in if your servant has found favor in your eyes, da, 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 da. He's the one who implores them to spend the day with him, as he also feeds them and washes their feet, although he washes feet first, and there's commentary about that, but we don't have time. Okay, onward.
So Lot learned something from him.
We're going to come back to what he learned from where he was raised. Yes.
They had not yet lain down when the townspeople, the men of Sodom, young and old, all the people to the last man.
All right, now why is that important? What happened in the previous chapter?
But we were looking for 10.
We were looking for 10. Right? We had the argument between, argument may be strong. We had the discussion, the heated debate between Abraham and God about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And we left it by saying, if you could find at least 10, then God wasn't going to destroy 10 righteous people, then God was not going to destroy the town. And what did we just find out in explicit detail? There isn't even one. Not outside. Well, there's none outside of Lot's house, and whether there are any inside Lot's house is a matter of debate as well.
Right.
But certainly there are none outside of Lot's house, because we've just been told every single one, from young and old, all of them are there to, well, make a demand.
They gathered about the house, and they shouted to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may be intimate with them. So Lot went out to them to the entrance and shut the door behind him and said, I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong.
All right. So much has been argued about in history about what exactly the wrong is that he is trying to prevent them from committing. Obviously, many read this as saying the wrong is sodomy, as it's used in the modern English term. But many other commentators have said the wrong that's being committed here isn't the sodomy itself, but the abuse of those that are strangers and guests within a town. That the laws of hospitality were universal in the ancient Near East. They were really essential, and that to violate them was a huge problem. Why would the laws of hospitality be so important in the ancient world?
Well, precisely because there were no inns and motels and whatever, and as you traveled, you needed to be able to rely on the next group of people you were going to meet up with to help you.
And how would they determine of whether or not they would be good to you?
Whether the same would be true.
Reciprocity.
Reciprocity, right? So if the word gets out that Sodom takes people who are staying there as guests and rapes them, that's going to really make it hard for people from Sodom to travel to other towns. Because what sort of welcome are they going to get, right? So hospitality was one of the basic institutions that was maintained very, very strongly throughout all of the ancient world, because without it, you would have an instinct to kill a stranger before he could kill you, to take advantage of a stranger before he could take advantage of you. And once you get into that state of affairs, then the roads and the travels become just free-for-alls. And so what Lot is saying, he said, look, it's not just that you guys should be moral and humane and all of that. It's your own self-interest to not abuse these guys. Because it's just, once word gets out that that's what the people of Sodom does, we're sunk. We're sunk. Okay.
Look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do with them as you please. But do not do anything to these men, since they have come under the shelter of my roof.
okay. Not what is expected to be a legitimate offer, and one for which he is rightly condemned by the commentaries aplenty. We're going to come back to the girls later, because we are going to get to the finale of Lot and his daughter's relationship a bit later. So we're going to just set that to one side.
But they said, stand back. The fellow, they said, came here as an alien, and already he acts the ruler. Now we will deal worse with you than with them.
Right, they're upset because he's telling them no when Lot is not a native. Remember, Lot moved here after he separated from Abraham.
And they pressed hard against the person of Lot and moved forward to break the door. But the men stretched out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And the people who were at the entrance of the house, young and old, they struck with blinding light, so that they were helpless to find the entrance.
Okay, so the crisis is averted for the night, but we've got a good feel now for what the people of Sodom are like.
Then the men said to Lot, whom else have you here? Sons-in-law, your sons and daughters, or anyone else that you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against them before the Lord has become so great that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters and said, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law as one who jests.
Right, so your dad comes and says, time to get out because God's going to destroy the city. Yeah, okay. Did you forget to take your medicine? Do you think he's joking or just, making it up, or he's crazy? So they pay him no mind.
As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city. Still he delayed. So the men seized his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters in the Lord's mercy on him, and brought him out and left him outside the city.
And so Lot is dragging his feet. His family is just dragging their feet, and they are forcibly removing him from the city.
When they had brought them outside, one said, flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away. But Lot said to them, oh no, my lord, you have been so gracious to your servant, and have already shown me so much kindness in order to save my life. But I cannot flee to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Look, that town there is near enough to flee to. It is such a little place. Let me flee there. It is such a little place, and let my life be saved.
Right, so he basically say that the hills are too far, but this other town is close enough, and it's small, so maybe God doesn't really want to destroy it too, because how much sin could it have? Let me go there and be safe there.
He replied, very well, I will grant you this favor too, and I will not annihilate the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, flee there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Hence the town came to be called Zoar.
All right, so Zoar is where they take refuge for the night. Are you okay with the story so far? I know we're going fast. We got a lot of territory to cover to get the whole story.
As the sun rose upon the earth and Lot entered Zoar, the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from the Lord out of the heaven. He annihilated those cities and the entire plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the ground. Lot's wife looked back, and thereupon she turned into a pillar of salt. All
right, so this whole plain, this is the area down by the Dead Sea. If you go there today, it's not exactly what you would call a hospitable area. Anyone here travel to that part of Israel? Yeah, beautiful, scenic. Anyone think about building a house there? No. Why is it so inhospitable? The story comes to explain.
Next morning,
and we will come back to the salt, the pillar of salt in a bit.
Next morning, Abraham hurried to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and looking,
that is to say, the place where he was arguing with God about Sodom and Gomorrah.
And looking down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of the plain, he saw the smoke of the land rising like the smoke of a kiln. Thus it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain and annihilated the cities where Lot dwelt, God was mindful of Abraham and removed Lot from the midst of the upheaval.
All right, so just in case you weren't quite sure, why did God save Lot? For Abraham's sake. Lot has not shown himself to be worthy of a miraculous deliverance. It's not saying that he's like the most evil person in the world, although treatment of the daughters is a bit of an issue. But he's definitely not somebody that is so righteous, so upstanding, so perfect that you would expect God to delay justice just to make sure this person can be saved. But Abraham, that we can understand. And so the text makes sure that we understand that this deliverance was because of Abraham, not because of Lot. Okay, and that's going to become even more important as we move into the end of the chapter.
Lot went up from Zoar and settled in the hill country with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. And he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave.
All right, what? What'd they do?
Lived in a cave.
But why?
Yeah, why did he just go back to Abraham's house?
So, A, he could have gone back to Abraham. B, why not stay in Zoar?
Right.
Right? Remember, God said, okay, fine, I'll spare Zoar. Why not stay there? So part of the idea may be that he felt that God was, in fact, planning to destroy Zoar and only temporarily refrained from destroying it as he got to it. And so therefore he felt the need to flee from Zoar. But why a cave?
Because there wasn't any houses.
So there weren't any houses, absolutely. He could have gone back to Abraham, perhaps, but there's 2 issues the commentators raise with that. One is he had to leave Abraham in the first place because things weren't going so well between them. So going back may have been a problem. And 2, the idea may have occurred to them that if I go back to Abraham, I looked good in Sodom compared to them. What am I going to look like compared to Abraham? It's sort of like, if you're 5'6" and you travel among the pygmies, you look like a giant. And if you travel among the NBA All-Stars, you're going to feel like a pygmy. And so Lot may have been hesitant to go back to Abraham because he would have been shown to be the spiritual midget that he was.
Well, and also he was the resident alien at Sodom, and it didn't go very well. So maybe he doesn't want to be the resident alien in some other community.
Perhaps. And so he ends up in this cave with just him and his 2 daughters. Or the 2 surviving daughters, I should say. Okay.
And the older one said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father." That night they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day the older one said to the younger, "See, I lay with father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go and lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father." That night also they made their father drink wine, and the younger one went and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down and when she rose. Thus the 2 daughters of Lot came to be with child by their father. The older one bore a son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. The younger also bore a son, and she called him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites of today.
So, did you find Mashiach?
Yes.
No, you didn't find the
Yes.
Messiah as we were going through?
Yes,
You noticed him hiding there?
Yeah.
Where?
Ben-Ami.
Ben-Ami. Okay, so if we look at our commentary here from Bereshit Rabbah,
I'll get it.
there we
You
go.
only need one.
You only need one? Sharing is a wonderful thing.
Well, there are plenty of extra.
Okay. All right. So Bereshit Rabbah from Genesis Rabbah. Kathy, if you would be so kind.
Take your wife and your daughter and your 2 daughters who are here.
Sorry, that should be 2 daughters.
Who are here found. To find.
All right, so let's pause there for a second. Back up for a second, because I love JPS, as everyone knows, but the translations sometimes obliterate the reason why the Midrash comes to explain. So turn back to page 107 and go up to the very, very top line. It's verse 15 if you're looking in a different version. So at the very top it says, glasses need prescription, Shtei v'notecha hanimtzaot, right? Which literally means your two daughters that are found, right? Now, nimtzaot can just mean that they are found here, they are present. And that's certainly the way they are translating it. Up, take your wife and your two remaining daughters, right? The remaining daughters, they're translating for nimtzaot, that they are present, as opposed to the other daughters who are married that don't want to come because the sons-in-law think he's joking. We got how JPS got to its translation of remaining, right? But that's not the Hebrew word for remaining. It's the Hebrew word for being present because it is locatable. It is found in this spot. Make sense? Okay, because the Midrash is going to say, why use that word found, right, nimtzaot, for present in this circumstance? It must be teaching us something more than just God has a big vocabulary.
Two finds, Ruth from Moab and Naamah from Ammon. Rav Isaac said, I have found David my servant. Where did I find him? Inside.
All right, so what was found in these two girls? The two nations, right, of Moab and Ammon.
Right.
And both of them have women that come from them that are praiseworthy and laudable, right? Ruth is more famous, but Naamah as well from the Book of Kings is also considered to be very praiseworthy too. So these two were found in Sodom because without rescuing them and what comes later with their father, we wouldn't end up with Ruth and Naamah later.
And from Ruth we get David.
And from Ruth we get David. And from David we get the Messiah. Right? So without the chain of events being exactly as they are, we wouldn't have the seed, which is a word that's going to be very important in just a minute. We wouldn't have the seed for Mashiach, for redemption to eventually come. Got that? Got that chain? Okay. But let's find out a little bit more about Lot and Lot's wife. She gets a famous sentence all to herself. Let's find out about her.
Lot was reared in the home of Abraham, who showed hospitality to travelers.
As you all noticed, right? Hey, Lot's doing like what Abraham did. Hey, come on, guys, turn in here, stay with me. Things are good. Let me give you dinner.
Rav Isaac said Lot's wife quarreled with him over the salt to be offered to the guests. She responded, do you even wish to learn this bad habit from Abraham?
What's the bad habit?
Giving away the salt.
Yeah, being hospitable, right? It's what do you mean you're going to be, we don't know these people. We don't owe them anything. Well, why are you bringing these ragamuffins home? You know, you're always bringing home these strangers, these guests, these travelers, and they take our food and our salt. Salt was very expensive back in the day. It's where the word salary came from, and from the Romans, as well as the phrase "not worth your salt." Right? It's used for the same thing because salt was so valuable. She's complaining that he's learned the wrong lesson from Abraham. Right now, we of course think that Abraham's lesson is wonderful, but that's trying to show us the difference of her character, and it's trying to show us midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Because she quibbled over the salt, she becomes salt.
Is she a native of Sodom?
We're not told explicitly. We're told that Lot and his family go, but we don't necessarily know if Mrs. Lot, she is named in Midrash, but never named in the text, whether or not she is from Sodom or whether she simply adopted the ways of Sodom by this point. Certainly, it seems that his daughters married local Sodomites, and they are fully enmeshed. We also may see, we'll come back to them in a minute, hints that his daughters have kind of learned the tools of the trade of Sodom as well when it comes to whole getting him drunk and having sex then. So we don't have 100% sureness of where it is, but we do know that she's not going to be well handled in this story.
They are under the shadow of my roof.
Right? Remember when he goes out and he tells the guys, don't do this because these people are under my roof, under the shadow of my roof?
Means that Lot's wife divided their house into 2 parts and told her husband, if you want to receive them, do so on your part.
Right? So why did he say under the shadow of my roof? Because only half of the roof still belonged to him. And if you thought I Love Lucy invented the whole drawing a line down the middle of the room, no, it's at least 1,500 years old, perhaps older, depending upon when this story was first written. So again, she is being true to the Pirkei Avot teaching that one who says what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours is of the characteristic of Sodom. Onward.
Rabbi Isaac said, for she sinned with salt. That night, when the angels came to Lot, what was she doing? Going to all her neighbors and saying to them, give me salt because we have guests. And her intention was that the men of the city would come to know of them. Therefore, she became a pillar of salt.
All right. So very, very subtle woman. She has guests in the house. She doesn't like the guests. What the people of Sodom will do if they find that there are strangers in town, she doesn't want to be a betrayer to her husband. So all she does is go to her neighbors and say, oh, could I borrow some salt, please? And as the neighbors ask, well, why do you need some more salt? She says, well, you know, we have some guest travelers that came to our house. Wink, wink. And lo and behold, the mob shows up, right, which is explaining 2 wonderful questions. 1, why she turns into salt. And 2, how did the mob know they were there? And it seemed that Lot had done a really good job of whisking them away to his house. So how did they find out? Well, Mrs. Lot was going around asking to borrow a cup of salt. And in the process, spilled the beans. Sorry for the food metaphors. Okay, so terrible, terrible person, deserves everything she got, right? Pillar of salt, no problem.
I think they go to great lengths to make her a terrible person.
So they go to great lengths to make her a terrible person. Why?
To justify being turned into a pillar of salt.
So partly to justify her becoming salt, but also to teach a lesson about Sodom. Not the Mashiach part, to teach a lesson about Sodom in terms of the tzedakah and the hospitality. So they're using her characteristic, they're using her character as a way, what's the term, a foil to explain how bad being stingy to guests can be. Right? That if you're not hospitable, you're just like Mrs. Lot, and you all know what happened to her.
It just drives me crazy about
The midrash.
And the sages in general, where they put in so much that that they're pulling out of nowhere.
Well, it's not nowhere.
There's a grain of salt, and they made a bag of salt.
Yeah.
Take it with a grain.
Yes.
But it's just, I don't know.
I agree. And if you take every midrash as being a claim by the sages for historical accuracy, that is to say that the sage is saying, this is exactly what she did, that she went around to each and every one of these houses, and she deliberately did this in order to let people know that there were guests, in order that the men would come and remove them from her house. If you think that every single midrash is trying to tell us exactly what happened, the journalistic model, as it were, then yes, it gets really, really hard. It gets really, really hard just because the rabbis keep arguing amongst themselves, which is if they each thought they had the journalistically right tradition, which tradition was right then? Because oftentimes they are at odds about the actual events happening, or at least it sounds like the event happening. But what they're not at odds over is the message that they draw from the event. And that was their purpose, to hang the moral lessons, the ethical teachings or the halachic teachings on stories and characters that would then be easily remembered and identifiable. Right? So this is a pedagogical technique. This is a way of learning the lessons that they want us to learn, in this case, about hospitality and about tzedakah and helping people in need, with a story that would be familiar and would be easily remembered. And so we may say that's unfair to hang it on this poor woman. We're going to see they're going to restore her a little bit. But nevertheless, it was an effective technique because I guarantee you that everybody knows that Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt. That's like one thing everybody seems to remember because it's so vivid. And if I can ride that vivid image to because she wasn't hospitable and add that to the text, and being hospitable we know is a true Torah value, what harm have I done to her reputation? She doesn't have a reputation. She's an open and free person that I can paint as I need in order to teach the lesson that we do know is true. But we're going to save her a little bit of this humiliation by giving her some nice compassion.
She took pity on her married daughters who had remained in Sodom and looked behind her to see if they were followed.
Right? So like a mother would, she's been, remember, they were dragged out of the city by the angels. She is looking back, hoping that her daughters finally realize, the ones who had the husbands that thought he was joking, have finally realized, no, actually, this is bad. Should we go ahead and leave? I mean, after all, what's a day trip in the country? Why not? Just why risk it? Because I remember Abraham, he was always doing weird stuff, and that was usually true. So she looks back, hoping that her married daughters are coming after her.
As soon as she saw the back of the Shekhinah, she was transformed into a pillar of salt.
All right, the Shekhinah being God's presence, which in this case is in the process of obliterating the cities.
But interestingly, isn't that the female emanation or is the female aspect of God's being?
The Shekhinah is absolutely referred to as the female aspect of God's being in the language. It's also the most imminent or accessible understanding of God's presence. Who else gets to see the back of Shekhinah? Moses, right? From Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus. Moses is in the cleft of a rock and God's presence passes before, the hand across the cleft, and then God sees God from behind. Moses doesn't turn into salt. So, what's that? He was worthy, but the presence, the back of God's presence is usually understood by the philosophers and the commentators as being seeing God's presence through the events of the world. That we don't know what's going to happen, or we don't know why things are going to happen, but once they've happened, then we can see that God had a hand in it. Right? After the fact, we can see the repercussions and we can see God's presence. So in this particular case, what they're trying to say is that if you're like Mrs. Lot and you catch sight of God's presence in the world, it can stun and destroy you. It can eat you away. Although there are some commentators that say she didn't turn into salt. We're going to get to that in just a second. But that certainly it might embitter you. It might really destroy you when you see God acting in a way that you refuse to understand. Whereas Moses saw God as an aspect of mercy. I remember it was the moment when God was passing that he received the 13 attributes of God's mercy. She's not seeing the presence of God in that way. And she's seeing God as a force that's destroying her daughters. And that literally just destroys her from inside. It corrupts her in a sense of being unable to exist in that state with God destroying the people she loves, even if in every measure of the word they deserved it.
I like to think of this particular aspect of the story in terms of grief and her inability to move forward. It's her inability to get over the grief of losing her daughters.
Right.
And she, just as your tears are salty, if you continue to look back and to continue to question, why did this happen to me? Why did God take my family? You can never move forward. And that's why she turns to a pillar of salt. She's so encompassed in her grief.
Right.
And the lesson that we need to take in life is that we have to turn and we have to face forward.
Grief is essential, but it is not eternal.
Right.
Exactly. And indeed, Moed Katan, the section of the Talmud that deals with mourning rites, has a story teaching exactly that, where a woman loses a child, one of the greatest tragedies that can befall a person, and she is grieving more and more and more, and the rabbi comes to her and says, look, you have other children. If you continue to grieve like this, you'll bury them too. And she loses another child. And she grieves and grieves, and the rabbi comes again and again and again, and in the end, her grief leads her to bury all of her children. And indeed, she had 2 living children. She was turning back for the 2 that were behind. And she may have been trapped of what to do, and the grief consumed her. But certainly she's gone by the next story.
Right.
Whether she's dead or whether she is simply trapped in this loop, she's not there by the time we get to the cave, because we think she might have had something to say about that. But just in case you would like to not have her turn into a pillar of salt, we can read it that way too, says Rabbi.
She became a pillar of salt. She refers to the city of Sodom.
Right? Wonderful Hebrew. Every word is gender inflected. Every word has a gender, and the word city is a feminine word. And so she turned back, and what did she see? She saw it become a pillar of salt. She saw the city of Sodom turned into salt. And indeed, in the area, that's not a bad metaphor for the blasted mounds of these horrible chemical and caustic substances that are all over this area.
So what does Rollback say happened to her if she never appears elsewhere in the story?
That she simply left or died or went on, but not transformation. Yes, yeah, he has to come up with another explanation, but he wants to make sure that we don't think she was gone through a magical metamorphosis.
I guess I always objected,
Mhm.
or I still object to her being vilified, that this is punishment. See, if you don't do what God says, this is what happened to you.
Well, but to go back to our
That's why I brought up the feminine nature of God.
Right.
Right.
So if she was punished by God, it was by his feminine side.
Oh, does that make it better? If mommy hits you, it's not as bad as daddy?
well, hold on a second. But wait, let's
Generally, yes.
Well, I wasn't taking it as a male thing. I was simply taking it as cause and effect punishment. You know?
But if we back up to the initial discussion about the importance of hospitality, remember the cause and effect that was built into that wasn't from an external force. It was, if you treat strangers badly, strangers will treat you badly. And if she really did internalize the lessons of Sodom, then we shouldn't be surprised, in whichever way we want to interpret becoming a pillar of salt, that she was unable to, in some way, escape the disaster that befell the city. And it's not necessarily that God singled her out for punishment. It's that she singled herself out to be part of the disaster at Sodom and not be able to escape it. But apparently it was such a horrible disaster that even the girls were not completely able to escape its effect despite having survived. So just very, very quickly, because I want to make sure we have time for them. As it says in the bottom here, in connection to Lot and his wife, people say 2 blessings. That is to say, if you are at the location where the miracle happened, and no, we don't know exactly where that place was, but at one time there was a tradition of where in the plain you would say this blessing. You would say that for his wife, you would say, blessed is the true judge, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. And for Lot, you would say, blessed is he who remembers the righteous. Now,
That's a stretch.
who's the righteous that's being remembered? Abraham, exactly. So when you see the spot where God did a miracle for Lot, you remember that God remembered Abraham, which is what we just said was why the text itself said back on page 108, right? God was mindful of Abraham, right? And the word mindful, of course, in the Hebrew was not mindful, it's vizkor, and God remembered Abraham. So the remembering the verb only gets attached to Abraham, so you don't have to think that God was calling Lot righteous. You just have to think that our sages are saying, even for someone like Lot, God is willing to help them on behalf of the righteous. And for the mother, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, blessed is the true judge. It may not always seem fair to us. It may not have seemed fair to her, but part of Judaism and part of overcoming grief is recognizing Dayan Ha'emet, is recognizing God as the true judge. Now we end up with these 2 new nations at the very end of this. And what do we know about them from Deuteronomy, at the very bottom in italics on the first page?
And Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter the congregation of the Lord, even their 10th generation shall not enter the congregation of the Lord to eternity, because of the fact that they did not greet you with bread and water on the road when you were leaving Egypt.
All right, so the nations that are descended from Lot's 2 daughters and Lot are
Hospitable.
what?
Are not
hospitable. Right? What is the great crime that these two nations have committed when we were leaving? It wasn't that Moab and Midian conspired to overthrow our people and destroy them with Balaam and all of that, and it wasn't that Ammon came out to fight us in war. It was they didn't give us hospitality, right? They acted the same way that the people of Sodom acted, right? They were inheriting, from their mother's side, that type of behavior. But we know that actually both an Ammonite and Moabite do enter the congregation, right? Naamah from the Ammonites and Ruth from the Moabites. So why? And what were they doing in the first place, thinking they should have sex with their father? All right, so that's where we're going to turn in our final 15 minutes. Okay.
If not now, when? Perhaps he would die or no longer have children.
Right, so wonderful famous quote, which Rashi, based on the Midrash, sort of flips on its head. So it wonders why in verse 31, the older one says to the younger, our father is old. And they ask, well, why are they saying our father is old? What difference does that make? And Rashi says the difference is, if we don't do this now, he could just die of old age tomorrow, or perhaps no longer be fertile. So we gotta strike now. And in addition, Radak adds,
there is no chance that he will marry again and have children from such a woman.
Meaning, even if he did get married, he wouldn't likely to have children, and there's no chance he's going to get married anyway. So it's not like we can wait for his new kids to grow up to become our husbands, right? So we can't count on half brothers coming.
If we will die without having children, there will be no memory of our father at all. If you were to say that we should take husbands and have children, where would we find such husbands?
Right? Where are we going to find husbands?
Why did they think there were no people left on earth?
Okay, that becomes the big question.
Step zero.
Right? That's the steps. Well, the step zero, yes, but remember they begin by the phrase, and that's why the commentators answer it in this order, our father is old. And so they start off with dad's old, and the commentators, of course, go, wait a minute, what does that matter? And then they get to the point where they need husbands, and they seem to think husbands are in short supply. And the purpose of having husbands, however, you may have noticed Radak slipped that in there. And unfortunately, again, JPS kind of obliterates it. If you look at verse 32, right, they use the wonderful phrase, maintain life through our father. But what they leave out is the wonderful word zara, right, that they will make life for the father's seed, right, through his seed. And indeed, that word of seed comes up again later on. And just keep that in mind, because it's going to become important as we get further down. But why are they talking about maintaining the seed of their father? What is it that they're hoping to do? And is this a bad thing or a good thing, or a good thing but taken in the wrong direction? But first, we got to answer the question of why they thought husbands were in short supply.
His daughters thought the whole world had been destroyed, as in the generation of the flood.
You might imagine only 10 generations prior, according to the biblical chronology, had been the flood of the entire world. That's probably the kind of story that was still being told with regularity. Remember that time when the entire world was destroyed except for Noah and his family? And what do we have here? The whole thing is being obliterated except for a guy and his family.
Well, and we don't know how old they are, but they were clearly young enough that they hadn't been with men up until that point. So like if they were kind of prepubescent at the time that they leave Sodom, then they don't have much worldly knowledge.
Well, think of them probably around teenage age. They wouldn't have been 11 or 12 because they wouldn't be able to conceive. And they certainly
men at the time, but later on they're older. But I mean, so their developmental years,
right,
they've had a very different lesson of what the world is like.
Growing up in Sodom, yeah, that probably does change your perspective.
Rabbi, I'm just curious, are there any significant midrashes that draw any kind of connection and conclusion between Noah and what goes on with his sons and what goes on here between father and daughters? Because I was actually thinking that,
Yep.
and then you referenced the flood.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what are some of the parallels that we're seeing here? All right, we got Noah and his sons, and there's a problem that happens there having to do with revealing nakedness, right? And that's a euphemism that can also be used for sex. It's the euphemism that's used in Leviticus when talking about different relationships. What is Noah's state when all of that's happening? Drunk. What's Lot's state? Drunk, right? So there are some definite parallels. What's that?
Don't get drunk.
Well, don't get drunk is a big thing, but also they are both getting drunk after major disasters. Right? This is kind of, PTSD here, that they've gone through horrible situations. They are trying to forget it all. And in the process of forgetting it all, in the process of coping with their grief in another wrong way, to come back to the discussion of the mother, they end up causing new problems. So indeed, the girls may have thought that the world had been obliterated, but not every commentator agrees with that.
Did they try to absolve their sorrow or something?
Well, that's certainly what it seems to be. I mean, Lot, goes off to this cave with his two daughters, and rather than setting up shop, rather than, beginning to explore or see what happens, he just gets completely obliterated. That's kind of an unusual thing to do unless you are reacting to a horrible, horrible situation. And the girls may take that as further proof. Dad wouldn't get that drunk unless he thought the world was gone.
They knew there were other men, but they thought no other man would be a suitable marriage partner for them for spiritual reasons. Since they had been miraculously saved by God, they considered themselves as of superior status.
Lovely little twist on this. They knew there were other men, but there were no other appropriate men. There were no other suitable men. And the commentator is pulling off of the fact where he says, there is not another man on earth to consort with in the way of all the world. Now, oftentimes many commentators in the modern world will read that as being because it's the way of all world to want to procreate, and therefore we need to have husbands. But many of our medieval commentators say, no, it's the usual way that girl meets boy isn't going to work for us anymore. Not that there are no other men, but there are no other men that we can follow the traditional pattern of. And Atzikinim here is saying the reason why we can't meet another nice boy is because no one's good for us, because a miracle was done on our behalf. What man is good enough for a miracle girl, right? It's just not going to happen. The Supergirl, exactly. Which I hear the pilot episode was pretty good.
Yes.
I haven't seen it, but I heard it wasn't too bad. The trailer looked terrible. Rabbi.
It is very difficult to accept that they thought there were no more men, seeing that they had just left Zoar, so that they had every reason to believe that other regions of the earth had also not been affected. Also, their father had told them that the reason why Sodom and Gomorrah had been destroyed was due to their inhabitants' wickedness.
Right? So if Sodom and Gomorrah were only destroyed because they were wicked, then other places that were not equally wicked should be just fine. Right? So the girls shouldn't have any reason for the girls should have every reason to believe that the majority of the rest of the world was probably still okay. So therefore, we can't say that they're having sex with their father just because they thought there were no other people around. Make sense? Okay.
So I think this is, I think.
Oh, it's supposed to be, get rid of the I, yeah.
Yeah. Rabbi Yosef Karo's explanation is better. The elder sister told her younger sister that none of the remaining men of the world would want to marry them, seeing that they had lived in the wicked city of Sodom. People would not want to associate with anyone who had only narrowly escaped the fate of Sodom. So
Radak and Datzikinim are just wonderful antonyms, right? On the one hand, the Datzikinim says, no one can marry us because a miracle was done for us. And what's Radak's counter?
No one wants to marry us because of where we're from.
Yeah, no one's going to marry us because we only just escaped that horrible place. And everyone will consider us to be at least almost as bad as the rest of the people in the city. So yeah, maybe a miracle was done for us in that we were narrowly able to escape, but we were only narrowly able to escape, whereas all the other good people, they didn't have to worry about narrow or otherwise. They were fine. So who are we going to find as a dad? I mean, who are we going to marry? how will we preserve our father? How will we preserve our people? Because no one's going to want to marry us, either because we're horrible or because we're too good. Make sense? Okay. Which is going to bring us back to the one question that no one's asked yet.
Well, where did we get the wine?
Where did they get the wine? You were going to, well, you could have, and then I would have told you to wait.
A miracle was performed for them, and the cave in which they lived became a portent of the world to come, dripping with wine as in the depiction of the world to come. And in that day the mountains shall drip with wine.
All right, so from Yoel, the prophet Joel, there's this image of the mountains dripping with wine. By the way, what do you think he might have been talking about? How does a mountain drip wine?
Grapes.
Grapes, exactly, the grape harvest. You look up on the mountain slopes of Israel at the right time of year, even today, actually, especially today, because the vineyards in Israel have done so well, and the mountain is covered with wine. It's literally dripping with wine from the vineyard. Midrash Rabbi is taking this a little bit more literally and saying that in that day, it's not just about the fruitful prosperity, fruitful posterity is a bit of a Freudian slip in this case, but is about a literal wine dripping from the mountains. And that's where they got the wine to inebriate their father. And why in the world would God have given them wine to get their father drunk?
That we may preserve seed from our father. The word is zera, seed, and not ben, son or child, which hints at Mashiach. Right?
Why did God need them to get their father drunk? And why would this hint at the world to come?
Because
We're leading up to Mashiach.
Because we're leading up to Mashiach. Without them doing what they do, there would be no David, there would be no Messiah. Now, does that mean God approves of incest?
Right.
Absolutely not. But does it mean that there is something about what they're doing that is the seed for redemption? Not necessarily the gory details of what they do with their dad, but something about their goal, their wish, their desire. We have three different responses here to the destruction of Sodom. Right? We have Mrs. Sodom, or Mrs. Lot, also known as Miss Sodom. And what's her response? To look back, to be turned into salt, right? She looks back, whether that means she can't escape her grief, whether that means she goes back into the conflagration, or whether it just means she is so part of that city she can't escape it. In any case, she is out of the picture. What's Lot's response to the destruction? He got drunk. Oblivion, right? It's I'm going to escape this world by alcohol, and I will no longer be a part of it. It's just I'm done. I'm going to go live in a cave of all things. Not even a tent. I mean, the guy just go get a tent somewhere. He lives in a dark cave. It's depression and self-medication to escape the tragedy of what's happened. And the girls look to the future and they look to life. Now, they choose the wrong way to fulfill that, but their instinct, according to our commentators, was a good instinct, which is, yes, there has been a tragedy. Yes, it is horrible, but we do still have to build life. We do still have to have a future. And right now, the only future I'm seeing is snoring loudly in the corner of the cave. They needed to look a little further than that, which is why the commentators work so hard to excuse why they would have these blinders on to only see him. But the reason they were looking at him in the first place was the right reason, which is that the seed has to go on. And that's the seed of redemption. That's the seed that leads us to the world of come. That no matter what, we will find a way to make life better again. We will rebuild. I don't know if you've been following the whole demographic arguments and discussions about the Jewish people and everything. Everything got shadowed by the Pew report about the affiliation rates and assimilation rates and all of that. And no one seems to have been really taking up the idea that was also released at around the same time, that the world Jewish population has now recovered from the Holocaust. That our population is now equal to what it was before the show. Right? We have rebuilt. Now, we will continue to build further and further, but our population has rebounded.
Rabbi, is that raw numbers or percentage? I'm just curious.
Raw numbers. Raw numbers. Yes, a percentage of the world I don't expect to keep up with, many of the other population baskets of the world.
Yes.
But as raw numbers, I'm quite pleased that despite the tragedy of the Shoah, which could have either turned us to salt or driven us to drink, we have found ways to rebuild that are so much better than their way. But we have found ways to rebuild and grow. And may we continue to do so. And may we understand that their difficult choice was because they had blinders on for the way they could grow, but that their spirit to grow, that their decision to pursue life was absolutely the right one. And it's only that spirit that leads to redemption. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.